Off the hop, we're going to test these. I ain't the only thing in the shop with thick gear. These things got the old school thick gearing, real toothy, $1,500 worth of ratchets here. Ought to be a good time. A recall from the testing and calibration of this here hydraulic ratchet fucker. The Husky, old school style, 288 foot-pounds of torque it took to twist this right half in two, and 1,500 pieces. So that's our baseline. We're going to see what this Mastercraft wrench, that's just rebranded for Canada, it's Cambodian tire, but you see the embodiment here. This will be rebranded all over the world. I believe made in Taiwan and sold throughout the world under different brand names. Just have a gander at it and you'll recognize it from somewhere coastal, harbory, salvage kind of place. $200 foot-pounds. Seems to be yielding. And now it's getting stronger and stronger before it reaches its ultimate strength. You can see it's yielding quite a bit. Oh, and it's going over. Maybe 1,600. Tough to say from under these blankets. Nobody hear about us chickens? Oh, wow. There, we're at ultimate. Oh, we're bottomed out. Back. So we yielded so much that we bottomed out and there was no catastrophic blammo. Well, something that happens to me quite frequently. We stroked out. We'll take another bite at her. Okay. I wasn't watching. Kind of got bored there. Started painting my nails. So we'll have to review the tape. Classic torsional failure. One thing that'll be interesting is to see what effect this little pin bore has on. We see the detent ball here has an oblong hole. But classic failure right along the root here. And it took this much torque to make it yield and ultimately fail. I trust you'll forgive the temporal dissonance. I had a memory prolapse and I forgot where I was to, but she might not look like much. She got to where it counts. We made some special modifications. Now I don't have to go back in the tape to review what for this cracked at, wherefore rather this cracked at, on account of letting the machine do the work. It'll be blatantly obvious here how brilliant this little idea was shortly. Okay, snap on. Did I say brilliant? I meant utterly stupid. So what I've gone and done is I've taken the needle valve here, which is a flow control valve. It's got a check ball in the one direction. And I've clamped this down so the pressure will remain in the gauge after it's broken, so we know what the peak is. However, funny thing about these fittings, they don't work unless you tighten them up. Oh, and there was very little yield there. That means that's a very brittle part. Wow, the old snap-on. Fucking, do you hear that? It's the sound of my heart breaking. Good news. Droit du Seigneur not being taken advantage of, despite noises to the contrary. It is still intact. We're going to give her another go. Oh, some snappy. Some snapping and a cracking. Oh, more snapping and a cracking. Yeah, we're bottomed out on the tool. A little disconcerting on how that gauge moves. That failed right around 500, so that's only 96 foot-pounds. That means that what we done did is hoopa-joop the gear pawl. Here's the newer fap off. We're at 100 foot-pounds, say 600 psi roughly, and climbing. There we go. Wow, that's 1500, that's 288. That's where the Husky destroyed itself at. All right. Holy fuck. At 2000. Nah, we gotta be bottomed out. There's no way. Appears to be yielding. There we go. Well, it's popped down quite a bit. It's dropping still. So we were at 1250 psi. Who knew something as trivial as a ratchet? There's some fascinating stuff going on here. Metallurgy, mechanics, statics. I mean, okay, so we see here this style of ratchet is a very, very strong ratchet. It fails here at the square drive. Now, the failure itself is interesting because it's not actually a torsional failure, a pure torsional failure. A pure torsional failure in a non-ductile material will have a 45-degree hangulation on it. Essentially, the non-ductile material is very brittle. It's hard, it's very brittle, and that makes it fail terrible in tension. So it starts to get a shear, and then it grows all these tension faults, and it actually shears at 45. Now, it's tough to shear at 45 when it's in a socket, but at the same time here, we also have a material weakness, this detent ball. So by all rights, I would have expected this to shear at a 45. But because it's sheared at a flat here, this failure analysis sort of, well, you know, pissing with the cock we got and so forth. This failure analysis is telling me that there is also, not only is there torsion on this, but there is also bending moment on this. And that makes sense because we're sort of hung out here and we're forcing on this handle. We're not right in line with where the torque is. That means there is some bending moment to this. And we can see that in the failure mode. That's, yeah, pretty fucking cool, I think. Now, this guy, sort of a cheaper ratchet, strong as hell though. I forget what the numbers are. We can edit this in, well, you know, whatever. It's down in here in the doobly-doo or right here. But initially, it failed on the ratchet, and we had a second bite at her, and then it failed on the square. Now this guy, this old guy, it failed on the ratchet, not the little, well, the cogwheel here, not on the actual pawls themselves. You see, big chunk out of that. So this is still an effective tool up until you get to that one particular tooth that's sheared off. So this is still be working. What's the advantage of that? Well, I'll tell you in a second. Now this guy, the new one, it failed oppositely. It wasn't the big bowl gear here that failed. It was the pawls. So this ratchet completely fucked. Can't use it. This ratchet, you can still use it. However, Well, with this failure, maybe not so much, but this failure, this is going to save your knuckles, right? Because you just went, instead of going and breaking right clean off, now you've only broken 2 teeth off. So it's going to catch on the next one, maybe save your knuckles. Here's the thing though, guys are always saying, and I think this is kind of a red herring, that, you know, you buy Snap-on because your hands are worth more than a cheap ratchet. When you're using a tool, you always consider what's going to happen when what you're working on breaks, and also what's going to happen when the tool breaks. So you always want to be pulling. You don't want to be pushing if at all possible. You don't want to be pulling towards your face or anything that where your hand's going to get jammed in there. So you always got to consider when you put it, before you put a tool to the fastener or the saw, whatever, before you start reefing on that, you got to think to yourself, what happens when this breaks? And if you're not safe when it breaks, you got to do something else. You got to change it up, get a different tool, different body positioning, whatever. Get your teeth out of the way. Now, I don't like this style. 1, because it's ugly. 2, because it's so easy to change direction on this. You look at it the wrong way and the ratchet changes direction on you. Kind of a pain in the arse. But stronger than the Fap-Offs. Who'd have thunk it? I never would have guessed, considering these are 10, 20 times the price. What are you paying for? Well, you're paying for that professional cachet. You're paying for that Louis Vuitton handbag effect, essentially. But, you know, you do this for a living. You pull wrenches for a living. You're in the shit. You're up to your balls in minor piss. You really want to be fucking around with a shitty ratchet. Yeah, maybe it's just me. I got a soft spot for stuff that's made, you know, if not in Canada, at least in the US by probably people watching this channel. I mean, you know, you ever gonna go and sit and have a beer with the guy that made one of these? Ain't happening. Thanks for watching. Keep your dick in a vice. We're back. I had a sat and a stink about this. Do my best thinking in my head. That's nautical terms for washroom. In the words of the incomparable Keith Fenner, we are having an addendum to the dedendum. Here, well, there's nothing like a sleep as well. If you ever have a big decision to make sure you have a good restful sleep. Clears all the guck out of your mind. So, well, if in the committee in your head doesn't wake you up at midnight, but ain't nothing a little whiskey can't cure. Okay, where was I? Yeah, I want to touch on some of the peer review, and that's the beautiful part about the internet here, posting stuff on the internet, is it's instant peer review. So the well-considered questions and comments I take to heart, and I think about that sort of thing. In order to have a considered discourse, however, there needs to be a shared vocabulary, and unfortunately, technical literacy seems to be on the decline, especially on YouTube comments sometimes. But how to say this in a nice way? I'll have to fall back on the wonder years. Per my dear sweet mother, you ain't got nothing nice to say. Don't say anything at all. So, 3 things came out of this peer review. 3 issues, and 2 I can think of, but there are 3. 1 is, the third was the pumping action. These spikes, as you can see, we mitigated those spikes. We've calmed that down quite a bit just by slowing down the flow of air into the pump. Now that psh, pump sound you hear is not actually the pumping action. It's the release of air from the pumping element. That's the noise. So you can see it climbs up very nicely now. 2, you're going to get inaccurate results because you're not pulling on the handle where you would put your hand. You're choking it up. What are you, fucking nuts? Was my initial reaction. But then, you know, I got enough comments like that, and I started thinking about it, and it kicked some rocks down the road, and kind of thought, oh shucks, I might be subjecting myself to a Wrath of Khan error, thinking in oversimplifying things, thinking in 2 dimensions when this is a 3-dimensional system. We are going to dust off the most powerful tool in all of Christendom, statics. And what statics are is essentially equaling 0. You know that this is a static system because nothing is accelerating. If something is accelerating, we can add to that and do a dynamic analysis, but statics is the way to go for dead reckoning stuff. And I would really appreciate seeing a statics VJO by Grady Hillhouse, Applied Engineering. I think he would be excellent at making a VJO at that. It's beyond the scope of my channel. However, what we do is we take the most powerful tool in mathematics, which is the equal sign. And we make, because we know this isn't moving, all the sums of the forces equals 0. So that equal sign, it's such a powerful tool. It's a teeter-totter that is always balanced. So on one side, we put in the stuff we know in order to get the stuff that we don't know. Now on the one side, we already know what one of the answers is. 0. This is a dead reckon mind. Quick and dirty. Kilo 9 Oscar X-ray. Yeah, that's right. Cunningham's law. It states, the fella that started wikis, that programmed wikis, states the way to get an answer to a question is not to post the question, but to post the wrong answer to the question. And that works so fucking well on YouTube. You wouldn't believe it. I use that tool more than I should, actually. Now, to start the analysis, I'm not smart enough to think in 3 dimensions. I still need to think in 2 dimensions, but what we'll do is we'll slice it up. We'll do 2 dimensions this way, and 2 dimensions this way. So the first 2 dimensions, we have 288 foot-pounds of torque applied to this arm. In order for this not to fuck right off, there has to be an equal and opposite reaction. That equal and opposite reaction is provided by this bolt. So at 3.5 inches, this bolt needs to push up with 1,000 pounds of force. So if we extend that to the full 6 inches, now we've added 2.5 inches. I didn't think it was that much of a big deal, but I set to talking to your wife, and apparently 2.5 inches makes a hell of a difference. Now, if we had the bolt out here at 6 inches, we would only need 576 pounds. Now, in my mind, no big deal, because you don't see this bowing. Like, nothing's moving around here. No big deal. Just forget about it. But we look at the other second dimensional slice. Now, here's where the Wrath of Khan error got me. Now we have 1,000 pounds pushing up here, and this is protruded out. It's proud. So we have a bending moment. This wants to bend up, and I didn't consider that. So we look at how far out it is. It's 1/2 of an inch, 1,000 pounds. So that puts a hell of a lot of torque on that. It would put less torque if it was way out here. It would put less torque in that direction if it was way out here. It would, roughly half the torque. Also, half the shear stress, because, of course, for this not to move, not only does it not have to twist, but it doesn't have to, it also has to keep itself from shearing clean off. So now, without getting too much into mechanics and materials, that the stress in the material, okay, the stress in that tiny little square, 3/8 square, due to the torque, is roughly 300,000 psi. Just due to torque, straight up torque from in that one direction. Now, with the bolt here, we add the shear stress, 1,000 pounds up, remember, we add the shear stress, which is 7,000 psi, and we add that other planar bending stress, and that is 53,000 psi. So now we're at 350,000 psi stress in that material. Okay, if we move this bolt out to here, we reduce that force by half, essentially. That means we reduce the 7,000 psi to 3,500. That also means we reduce that bending moment by half. So now, instead of being at 350, we're at 320,000 pounds of stress in that tiny little square. That makes a difference. If you look at tool steels, 350,000 PSI Ultimate Strength is a very, very, very good material. It's an incredible material, in fact. So what we're looking at is, by having this bolt close up like it is, I reduced the amount of torque this thing could handle by about 10%. That's the guesstimation. All the numbers are there. If you want to run them for yourself, I would appreciate it. But just on its face, very quickly, spending a few minutes running some numbers, yes, it does make a difference, and that difference is about 10%. The third peer review thing was, I got a bottom side top wise Aeror doing the preliminary checks on these. I'm going to go further into that, but essentially, take the language and flop it around. It's the same fucking thing. So, but, fourth thing, also, sample size. I welcome you to design a protocol and buy all the fucking tools you want to destroy. But for me to go and buy 50 of them to get a proper sample size from different batches and so forth, it's a fucking YouTube video, man. So we're going to do these fine-tooth ratchets next, but I need to change, of course, it's an iterative process. I need to change the testing jig. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate it. Take care. Keep your dick in a vice.